Hi, and welcome back to part 3 of this passage planning, and let's see if it's working or not. If you can recall, I made myself a note. Here's Wednesday's note. To stay on top of things, it's just a reminder to keep by you. And there's the weather for Wednesday. The important bits are in my notes. Gate 1, 8:50 in the morning, and Gate 2, 14:10 in the afternoon. They're not really gates, they're just preferred times. And the weather, well, that's just a forecast. You've got to keep your fingers crossed that it works for you. Here we are, early o'clock in Aberdaron. There's a red sky, so the sun must be up somewhere, but he's not showing his face yet. Jeff's here on Aslan as well over there. He can sail back with me. There's a bit of wind, and it gets a bit more wind just before we're setting off. Well, 22 knots on the nose wasn't forecast anyway, so let's hope that changes. Here we are, motoring off towards the Sound. You're in the lee of the land when you're going through the Sound when there's a northerly. That big chunk of rock keeps you covered. Well, we're taking the inshore passage, which is supposed to give us a little bit of favourable tide. It's acting against the actual ebb. This actually keeps your speed over ground up, but puts a bit of a swell in front of you. That's all it is though, a swell. It's comfortable to ride over, it's just a big bump. The things that had changed this is if the wind went over it. So I suppose I'm very glad that those 20 knots that are out there are northerly and not westerly. Although, as soon as I get round the corner, I'll wish they were westerly and not northerly. There's loads of room on the inshore passage in between that rock and the mainland. Yeah, I do see a lot of people go around it for some reason. I think the biggest thing you got to avoid in here is pots, like anywhere else that's near the land. Mind you, on a spring, it does fly through here, this current, and if it's going the same way as you, you're in and out in the flash of a pan. On Exeton, there's a little bit of confused water, and all as it is the water that you've just taken, the back eddy, now hits the actual ebb. Creates little whirly pools or what have you, but it's not rough or anything, and you can actually see the flat water further ahead of you. I follow here the contour of the land as we go round the corner, because if you just keep going outwards you get to a point where there's a couple of lumps in the ground called the tripods. On the ebb, especially if it's wind over tide, you can get quite lumpiness there, a bit of overfalls, but it's extremely easy just to stay inside of it all. We're actually a little bit earlier than we should be, probably half an hour-ish. So it could have been a bit flatter if we'd have left it a bit, but the water's quite flat so we had no problems. But we've got a problem now because we're going to buck the tide for a bit. Well, as we motor up the coast, we're both thinking the same thing. We're thinking, I hope this northerly backs a little bit, because when we get round a little bit of headland ahead of us, we can change our course a few degrees to starboard. And that might be enough for us to set a sail. Bit close hauled, but set a sail, no doubt. This is our heading at the moment, fairly much into the wind, but when we get to this point here, we'll be able to make a course alteration and sail northeast almost. Well, we're just about here, so let's get them sails set and give it a go. Oh yes, it works. Now Swallow's about as close as she can get to the wind. I can't pull that sail in anymore because it'll be stuck on the spreaders, and we don't want that, do we? If this keeps like this, then I will actually miss Carnarvon Bar a little bit. I'll be a little bit to starboard, so I'll have to motor the last little bit in, or hope that the wind actually backs a little bit and I can curl my course a little bit and catch up at the end. Not forgetting that the weather forecast was for 10 knots on the north, but it did turn around and say that it was going to back north-northeast. Well, that little bit will help me loads. So I'm totally reliant on a good weather forecast being fairly accurate to be able to sail all the way up to Carnarvon Bar. We have a tide window, don't forget, further up. It's Bellon Point. At Bellon, 14:10, the tide turns against. A good engine might be able to shove a boat in past the tide, and certainly power boats don't worry about it, but I couldn't be bothered sitting there at 2 knots going through, so I'd just anchor out. But we might make it as long as we stay over 5 knots. As you can see from the chart plotter, we've still got about 15 miles to run, as we're only just coming up to Porth Incline. At Porth Incline now on my starboard beam. That's an anchorage or safe haven should we have needed it. It looks like Windy's weather forecast has become quite good. It's only backed a touch at the moment, but a touch is better than a veering. We're still fairly close hauled, which I don't think Swallow actually enjoys being close hauled, but we're making our 5 knots, so that's all that matters. The wind begins to back just a little bit more, and Swallow begins to pick up a bit more pace. This hopefully will give us a bit of tide in hand at Bellon. It's one of those everything's grey outside days. The sea's grey, the sails are grey, the sky's grey, the decks are grey, everything's just grey. It's a John Major day. But Swallow's doing what she does best, and I'm loving it. Well, it's not that far now. I don't know whether you can see the darkness in the haze, or the darkness in the haze at just above sea level. That's Anglesey coming into view. And hopefully a fairway buoy there somewhere as well. It's about 4 to 5 miles away at the moment though. Jeff's about 1.5 miles ahead of me on the port side. He picked a slightly better line, but then he's got a slightly better windward boat, so he can. Jeff said he's late getting back, so he's in a bit of a rush. He told his wife he'd be back 4 days ago, and she might be worried about him by now. I'm sure he's updated her at some point though. I can quite clearly make out the coastline now ahead of me, and I can see where I'm going, though I can't see any buoyage. I can see the rocks and the lighthouse at Pilot's Cove, and that gives me a good indication to where I am. When I look back, I'm normally looking back down the Clint Peninsula, which is a gorgeous sight, but it's just grey still. Everything's just grey. I always think the last few miles always seem to be the hardest in any voyage. You set off and you're just waiting to see what's going to happen, and the voyage just sets into place. Bit by bit, you do all your bits, and then you become the passenger. When you've been a passenger for a bit, and everything's staying exactly how it should be, and staying on course and everything, and everything's just working fine, then you're happy with everything. And it's not till you think you're getting to the closing stages that you start getting a little bit of anxiety, thinking, oh, it's going to end soon. Well, from the time when you first work out where the land is in front of you and where you sort of want to be, and you can actually see the channel starting to appear ahead of you, you start putting in your mind where you need to be and what you need to be doing next. Within the last mile, visibility over the land just opens up. You won't believe what it's like. The sun's shining, there's colour in the water. It's a completely different place. I enter Carnarvon Bar buoyage system, and the wind begins to die. So I'm forced to put my iron sail on when I get to the Musselbank buoy and motor through Bellon Narrows. This is the view as you enter Bellon Narrows, with Anglesey on my port side and the mainland on my starboard. That's Bellon Point there. The beaches on the opposite side and the sand dunes, well, that's Abermenai. That's my favourite anchorage on the other side of that set of sand dunes. That's where we'll be going next. Well, dare I say it, yes, I'm going to. This passage plan worked. It was a 10 out of 10 plan. Both the planning, part 2 and part 3, have all come together exactly how they should. Just like a good passage plan should. The weather come from windy.com. It was spot on. It's my go-to choice for weather forecasts. Everything else just comes from pilotage notes and just learning basically how to bang them all together. Well, I hope you've learned something from this little experiment, and hopefully it'll give you some confidence putting some of your own pilotages together. I hope you've enjoyed watching. This is more or less my home waters now. I'm quite happy I'm here. I'm going to have a few pints and sleep like a baby. Well, my anchor's down and it looks like I'm the only one here. How good is that? If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please do so. It's free. And hit the notifications bell as well and give me a thumbs up. It all helps. Thank you very much.